The dimly lit bar pulsed with a quiet energy, the soft murmur of conversations blending seamlessly with the clinking of glasses and the distant hum of a jazz melody floating from an old record player in the corner. The air was dense with the scent of aged whiskey, tobacco, and the faint trace of expensive perfume, an intoxicating mix of nostalgia and melancholy. Seated alone in a secluded booth, a woman traced the rim of her glass with a delicate finger, her gaze lost in the slow swirl of amber liquid. She was known to the world as Victoria, an enigma wrapped in elegance, a portrait of composed grace and veiled vulnerability. Her dark, wavy hair framed her face, accentuating the striking emerald of her eyes, which flickered with something unreadable, a thought, a memory, a secret. Clad in a fitted black dress that highlighted her slender curves, she seemed both untouchable and irresistibly magnetic. The bar, a hidden gem in the heart of the city, had long been a sanctuary for weary souls seeking solace in anonymity. Its walls had absorbed whispered confessions, longing glances, and the soft sighs of love lost and found. Tonight was no different. Except tonight, fate was weaving something intricate in the shadows. As Victoria lifted her glass to her lips, savoring the slow burn of the whiskey, a figure emerged from the dimly lit entrance, his silhouette casting elongated shadows across the wooden floor. He moved with a self-assured grace, the weight of the world resting on his shoulders yet carrying it as if it were a mere inconvenience. His dark, tousled hair fell just right, and his sharp blue eyes held the kind of intensity that both unsettled and intrigued. He was a man who had seen too much and spoken too little of it. His gaze flicked across the room before settling on Victoria, as if drawn by some unseen force. Their eyes met, and in that instant, something electric crackled between them, a silent recognition, a moment of profound inevitability. Without hesitation, he approached, his confidence neither forced nor exaggerated but simply ingrained in his being. As he neared her table, the ambient noise of the bar seemed to fade, leaving only the distant rhythm of jazz and the steady thrum of anticipation between them. "Mind if I join you?" His voice was smooth, low, with just the right amount of intrigue to make her wonder. Victoria looked up, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile. "That depends," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Are you good company?" He chuckled, a deep, rich sound. "I suppose you'll have to find out." With a graceful nod, she gestured to the seat across from her. He slid into the booth, his presence enveloping the space with an unspoken command. "You don't seem like someone who frequents places like this," he observed, studying her carefully. Victoria smirked, swirling the remnants of her drink. "And you seem like someone who assumes too much." He leaned back, an amused glint in his eyes. "Fair enough." For a moment, silence settled between them, not awkward, but charged, as if they were two players at the start of a long, intricate game. The jazz tune shifted, a slow, sultry number, curling through the room like cigarette smoke. "So what brings you here tonight?" he finally asked. Victoria exhaled, her fingers tapping lightly against her glass. "Maybe I was looking for something. Maybe I wasn't. Maybe the city just brought me here." He nodded, as if understanding more than she had said. Sometimes, places like these have a way of drawing in the people who need them. She studied him, intrigued. "And you? What brought you here?" A shadow passed over his face, fleeting but noticeable. "Let's just say, I'm no stranger to nights like these." She didn't push. Not yet. The conversation wove between them, effortless and engaging, the outside world fading with each exchanged word. Victoria learned that his name was Alexander, that he carried a past heavy enough to leave traces in his eyes, but light enough not to weigh down his presence. He learned that Victoria was not as fragile as she looked, that her mind was as sharp as her beauty, and that beneath her polished exterior lay a heart that had been tested and tempered by experience. Time slipped away unnoticed. Another round of drinks arrived. A few glances from other patrons hinted that their presence had not gone unnoticed, the kind of attention that follows two people whose chemistry is palpable. Then, just as the night seemed to settle into its rhythm, a shift occurred. A man entered the bar, his eyes scanning the room with purpose. He was older, dressed in a well-tailored suit that spoke of wealth, but carried an edge that suggested he was not merely a businessman. Victoria tensed ever so slightly. Alexander noticed. "Friend of yours?" he asked, keeping his tone light but his expression sharp. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for her drink, taking a slow sip before responding. "Not exactly." The man's gaze landed on their table. His lips curved into a knowing smirk as he began walking toward them. Alexander remained composed but alert, his fingers grazing the edge of his glass as if preparing for whatever came next. "Victoria," the man greeted smoothly as he reached their table. "Fancy seeing you here." "Daniel," she acknowledged, her tone neutral, but carrying an undercurrent of something unreadable. "What a surprise." "Not really," Daniel countered, his eyes flicking briefly to Alexander. "I have a habit of knowing where you end up." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "That sounds more like an obsession than a coincidence." Daniel chuckled, unbothered. "Just looking out for an old friend." Victoria's fingers tightened around her glass. "We're not friends, Daniel." A flicker of something dark crossed his features before he masked it with a smirk. "We'll see about that." With a deliberate slowness, Daniel placed a card on the table. "If you ever feel like reminiscing, you know where to find me." Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as effortlessly as he had appeared. Alexander picked up the card, turning it between his fingers before placing it back down. "Should I be concerned?" Victoria let out a slow breath, her gaze fixed on the spot where Daniel had vanished. "Only if you plan on sticking around." He met her eyes, searching for something deeper beneath her composed exterior. Then, with a slow, deliberate smile, he lifted his glass. "Then I suppose I should order another drink." Victoria's lips parted in a mixture of amusement and surprise. And as the jazz played on, weaving its melody around them, she knew that the night was far from over, and perhaps, just perhaps, neither was whatever had begun between them.